beauty of Michael Jackson. The guy was so clever about it. Think about it. He screwed every kid in Hollywood except Macaulay Culkin.
Mr. Langston,
So he's that canary in the coal mine. Macaulay Culkin said, no, I go to Neverland Ranch, he never touched me.
Yeah, that's what I would say,
So all
too.
the other kids are coming back. They still swear up and
That's
down.
what I would say. It's like if you went to a bachelor party and everybody got their dick sucked, and your wife said, "Hey, what the fuck?" Bobby says he got his dick sucked. Not me. I don't know. I mean, maybe she just didn't like me.
Yeah, but Macaulay Culkin has no reason to say that now.
Yes, he
Virginia
does.
State University.
Really?
Yeah, nobody wants to know
I
that
have
you got
great
molested
respect
by
and
Michael
appreciation
Jackson.
for
You'll never
Mr.
get a girlfriend
Langston and
again.
the
You're
life
going
he
to get one hell of a book
Not
deal.
only
Come
will his
on, you
legacy
should be about to go
belong
down on
his
you and she'll think,
descendants,
"Oh my God, Michael
but to
Jackson."
myself and all of us who occupied this great hall,
Right?
who
What
fight
do you think?
for
You'll get
the
one
spirit
hell of a book
equality,
deal.
justice.
Well, Andrew
Thank you,
Breitbart,
Mr.
actually, not
Speaker. I
Breitbart,
yield
the
back
trademark.
now
Andrew
for my
Breitbart,
time.
the name is, I mean, he was actually the guy who got my start, and he wrote about that, Neverland Ranch, his photographer
purpose does the gentleman
was
from
a
Pennsylvania
pornographer who
seek
specialized in European actors who looked
Without
underage.
objection, the gentleman is
And so once
recognized
he
for 1
talked
minute.
about this, the guy was fired from Neverland Ranch. I think it was 6 months later he was back. So my point with like the
Thank you.
pizza meat stuff is
Mr.
there are things that are
Speaker, it
provable
is
like that, which people can go
literally
search
every
Andrew
day
Breitbart and
now
find that story.
That's something
And
new.
because
and even
people are
more
cocked and
shocking
loaded to hate
comes
someone
out
from the
about
right
Trump
online,
administration
cocked.
and its connections with the
Well,
Russian
you really do
government.
go to a different voice with
Just
nasty
last
words.
night,
That was my
it was
Beavis and Butthead
reported
voice.
that according
Because of that,
to
I'd rather dwell on
American
stories that we know we can prove or
officials,
commentary, because it's really easy to
at
go,
least
oh,
four
Nick Rado was wrong
members
with
of the
Pizzagate
Trump
or whatever it is. So we just
campaign,
there's so much there
senior
that's
members,
real.
were in
That's where I focus.
constant
That's my issue with Alex
contact
Jones.
with
Yeah,
Russian
Alex Jones goes super deep, and I did not know before I had him that he was a Sandy Hook denier.
Mr. Speaker,
And I saw that,
this
and
is
it's pretty rough.
not
It hurt
so
my
much
soul.
about
It really did.
Republican or Democrat.
Yeah, he's
As
been
it's
very,
about
his son is a fan. He's been
democracy.
really, really good
Our
to me and
democracy.
coming on the show. He's done the Young Turks
I
sketches.
would thank
I think he's
Gonna find it.
right.
Thank you,
It's
Mr.
there.
Speaker, and I
But
yield back.
you got to be careful what you call corruption and what you call
purpose does the
conspiracies.
gentleman from
Right?
New
Because there
Jersey
are
seek recognition.
a fuck.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to read a letter from a Syrian refugee to the Interfaith Coalition sponsoring his family, which settled in Bloomfield, New Jersey last month. Mohammed is a father of 4. His family is one of the last to arrive prior to the signing of the President Trump's ban. Mohammed wrote, "I feel ashamed when I repeat the word thank you. It is very few and very weak in front of your interest and your generosity. The first thing I want to learn in English language is how I can thank you more and more. America is beautiful because you live in it." These are the kind of families the Trump administration wants to turn away. They are the oppressed and the persecuted, the kind of people this country was founded for. Understand the need to vet people coming to our country, and it's the importance of protecting our nation's security. No one questions that at all. But we cannot close our country to refugees like Muhammad and his family. We cannot sacrifice what it means to be American. Muhammad is right. America is beautiful, and we can keep it that way by remaining a beacon of freedom and hope. And I yield back.
The chair announces the speaker's appointment pursuant to 22 U.S. Code 276 and the order of the House of January 3rd, 2017, of the following member on the part of the House to the British American Inter-Parliamentary Group.
Mr. Rodney Davis of Illinois.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2017, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Vesey, is recognized for 60 minutes as a designee of the Minority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the subject of this special order.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are going to talk today about something very important, our economy, jobs, the state of America in regards of those subject matters. And first, I would like to call a good friend of mine, our colleague, our assistant leader, Mr. Jim Clyburn from the state of South Carolina, to come address us on a very important issue that relates to many of those things that we talked about. And Leader Clyburn, I'd like to invite you to come and talk today, and really appreciate you taking the time to be a part of this hour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you so much, my friend Congressman Vesey from the great state of Texas. Mr. Speaker, I rise today as part of the observation of Black History Month to continue my series of remarks regarding HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities. I ask my colleagues to join me in celebrating Benedict College in Columbia, South Carolina. Founded in 1870, just 5 years after the end of the Civil War, by the American Baptist Home Mission Society, Benedict was originally named Benedict Institute after Stephen and Bathsheba Benedict of Rhode Island, Baptist abolitionists who donated the funds to acquire the property on which the campus sits. Formerly the site of a pre-Civil War plantation, the first classes were held in a dilapidated mansion on the grounds. Benedict Institute was formally chartered by the South Carolina General Assembly in 1894 and renamed Benedict College. From its founding through 1930, Benedict was led by Northern white Baptist ministers. In 1930, Reverend John Starks, an alumnus of Benedict, became the school's first African-American president. The heart of its campus has been designated the Benedict College Historic District, consisting of Morgan Hall, Pratt Hall, Duckett Hall, and Tisdale Chapel, and Starks Center. Like Allen University, its neighbor, Benedict College has a long legacy of activism for civil rights and social justice. One of the very first civil rights campaigns in South Carolina was organized at Benedict College in 1937. Students participating in a national NAACP campaign led a demonstration in support of anti-lynching legislation pending in the Congress. One of Benedict's early graduates was Reverend Richard Carroll. Born into slavery in Barnwell, South Carolina, Reverend Carroll was a prominent minister in the late 1800s who received honors and appointments from both President William McKinley and President Theodore Roosevelt. Other prominent alumni include Majeska Simpkins, a prominent civil rights and public health champion, General Matthew Zimmerman, who served as Chief of Chaplains of the United States Army, and I.S. Levy Johnson, the first African-American president of the South Carolina State Bar. In the modern era, under the leadership of President David Swinton, Benedict has grown to a student body of more than 2,800 undergraduate students. In 1995, President Swinton revived the football program and marching band, 30 years after they had been shut down. He also championed a new sports complex on Two Notch Road in Columbia and includes a football stadium, tennis courts, baseball fields, and fitness facilities. The liberal arts curriculum now offers degrees in 30 different disciplines. President Swinton also has led the efforts to preserve and restore many of the historic buildings on the campus, in part paid for with federal funds from the HBCU Historic Preservation Program that we in this Congress have championed. President Smithson will retire this summer after 23 years of service to the institution. I wish him well and thank him for his leadership. Today, on the same land where blacks once toiled in slavery, their descendants are now learning the tools they need to live up to Benedict College's motto, to be powers for good. Like so many HBCUs, Benedict offers a unique collegiate experience in which students from many different backgrounds share a common struggle for equality. And I'm pleased to recognize them today. With that, I'll yield back.
I want to thank the leader for his comments and for participating tonight. Really appreciate his words and that recognition. And I want to thank everyone that is with us today to talk about our Blue Collar Caucus and jobs in this country. I think that there's nothing more important to any individual, any man or woman, than the ability to be able to have a good job, to take care of your family, and to be able to be a part of the American economy and to contribute to that economy. And I want to talk about, start off talking about President Barack Obama. Under President Barack Obama, the American economy added 9.3 million jobs and overcame one of the worst economic crises our nation has ever seen. In Arlington, Texas, which is part of the district that I represent in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, we have a General Motors plant. And as you know, we could have lost our car industry. We have probably the most profitable plant in the General Motors family. All of the cars that you see around here at the Capitol, all of the Yukons, all of the Suburbans, the Tahoes, the Escalades, we make those in Arlington, Texas, and we're very proud of our plant and very proud of the company being there all those years, and for the UAW workers there that helped make that plant great. Despite the gains that we have seen with President Obama saving the auto industry, with the 9.3 million jobs.
30 years after they had been shut down.
Economic crisis.
He also championed a new sports complex
many workers across
on Two Notch Road and Martin football stadium.
The rise of automation, outsourcing, pushed many of those workers out of jobs that they absolutely loved. The frustration felt by these workers is understandable. Everyone wants a good job that lets them, for their family, be able to take care of themselves, be able to pay their bills, send their kids to college, buy a car. President Trump appealed to many blue-collar workers during his campaign with a populist message and pledges to help working America. But his actions since taking office directly contradict so many of his promises. President Trump, ladies and gentlemen, is playing one of the slickest political scams we've ever seen on hardworking American families. It is a scam. It is not real. On his first day in office, President Trump signed an executive order that raised mortgage rates for new homeowners. Those same people that live in those Rust Belt states, those same individuals that were Democrats that went on television and went on social media and said they were going to give this guy a chance. And what does he do on the very first day? We're going to raise interest rates on new homeowners. People trying to live the American dream. There's nothing more that embodies the American dream than being able to buy that first home. It was a slap in the face to those blue-collar workers and a boost to Wall Street. President Trump also signed an executive order that made it easier for Wall Street bankers to make money on risky bets. His labor and his Treasury cabinet nominees both have track records that are very unfriendly to middle class and have no understanding what middle class workers face. It is clear that President Trump does not have a plan to fight for the working man and woman as he promised on the campaign trail. That's why my colleagues and I, Brendan Boyle, who is here with me from the state of Pennsylvania, we formed the Blue Collar Caucus to address challenges facing blue collar workers in today's economy. We're going to stand up to the Trump administration when he turns his back on working class America. Our mission is to listen directly to middle class America's concerns and translate their needs into policies that allow them to adapt to the changing job market. We have to be able to equip our blue collar workers with training that leads to jobs and opportunities. We just can't say job training. Those training opportunities have to lead to something of substance, which is a real job with a paycheck and some benefits. This year alone, the U.S. is expected to add 2.5 million middle-skilled jobs, the majority of which employers are telling me, and they've been to my office, and Brendan, you probably heard the same thing. They're saying that these jobs are hard to fill. The Blue Collar Caucus, we're going to prioritize training and retraining initiatives to provide real opportunity and security to working class Americans. And I have a lot more to say, but I do want to turn it over to Brendan Boyle from Pennsylvania, my good friend, who also has the same passion to represent and really stand up for working class America, for blue collar America, not just promise them things, not just get them pumped up with a bunch of hype, but to really talk about real policy initiatives that will help them be able to put some food on the table and put a little bit of money in the bank and be able to buy that first house and buy that car that they always wanted. Brendan, thank you very much for your dedication to blue collar America.
Thank you. I thank you so much, and I'm very excited to be joined in this effort with you. This comes out of a number of conversations that my colleague Mark Vesey and I have had just in the back of this chamber about both of our experiences growing up, which were very similar, coming from working class or blue collar parents who worked very hard to make sure that their children had opportunities that they may not have had. In many ways, that is the American experience. People who work hard, play by the rules, pay taxes, raise their kids, and hope that their kids will have opportunities that they didn't have. That is what built the American middle class. And what is so difficult about the time in which we're living is that it's not just about an economic growth that is 2%. It's not just about the statistics that we often cite on this House floor. It's about a loss of hope in the power of the American dream. There was a statistic that came out, having just said it's not about statistics, let me cite one, that I think is in fact very telling and really shocking. The World War II generation, 92% of that generation went on to earn more than their parents did. For the generation of which I'm a part and Mark is a part, taken at exactly the same point in life, that figure is exactly 1/2, 46%. Consider another statistic that compared to the year 2000, in inflation-adjusted figures, the middle class has less wealth today than at that point 16, 17 years ago. That is the only decade and a half that you can look at in American history in which the middle class is worse off than the decade and a half that preceded it. So while these are presented as just quote-unquote economic issues, really they're much more than that. They strike at the very heart of who we are as Americans and what we stand for. So we're going to be talking as part of this caucus and over the next close to an hour or so, but for many weeks and months to come, about what we can do specifically for the blue-collar economy, for those who work with their hands, for those who have been in many ways held back because of transitions that our economy has faced. I have many things that I want to talk as part of that, but I don't want to go on too long because we've been joined by someone who doesn't just talk the talk, but has walked the walk. A union worker himself, an iron worker, I believe, a good friend of mine from Massachusetts, and someone who works hard himself, both in his previous occupation and now standing up and fighting for working people here as a member of Congress. colleague from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Mr. Lynch.
Thank you, Mr. Boyle. I appreciate that. It's wonderful to join both yourself and Mr. Veazey from Texas. Thank you for creating the Blue Collar Caucus. I think its time is perfect for the challenges that we face as a country, and I think also as a Democrat, embracing some of our tradition, and I think in some cases we've drifted from that. I do want to talk about the blue collar economy and what's happening to people who work in the building trades and work as truck drivers and nurses and people who are really the backbone of this country. And as Brennan mentioned, I was an iron worker for about 20 years, and I know what it is when you're trying to work from paycheck to paycheck, strapping on a pair of work boots every single day. But I also want to focus tonight on one part of Mr. Trump's executive orders and policies that has really hurt people in our demographic, regular working people. And I want to speak specifically about veterans. As most people heard, President Trump, when he came into office, initiated what was called a federal worker hiring freeze, stopping any workers from going to work for the federal government. I just want to remind people out there that about 30% of those workers are veterans. So 30% of the people who go to work for the federal government are veterans. So by putting a freeze on federal workers, you're blocking that almost one third of workers who are veterans who would be trying to go to work. Now, the federal government is expansive. That includes workers at the VA, it includes workers at the FAA, it includes workers at the Defense Department, the State Department, on and on and on. So this is really freezing out veterans from going to work. I had a young veteran in my office the other day who he had some skills in radiology. He had learned that through the VA, through his military service in the Navy, but also when he got out with the GI Bill, trying to go to work at the VA. And I had to explain to him that President Trump, when he came into office, put a hiring freeze on, and that we were going to have to try to figure out another way to put him to work. Well, that case is playing out over 50 states and thousands, probably tens of thousands of workers right now. Veterans are being denied the opportunity to go to work for the federal government. And many of them have skills that are necessary. We have people retiring and leaving the federal employment on a daily basis. We have nurses that are retiring at the VA and folks that work for the EPA. They're leaving. It's the end of their working lives. They're retiring. Yet we're blocking these veterans from filling those positions because of the president's hiring freeze. So seeing that, I actually drafted a bill that I'm happy to share. It's H.R. 1001, and it will basically create an exemption. It will keep the president's freeze in place, except for veterans coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, veterans who have served in previous conflicts. Anyone who was put on this country's uniform as a veteran would be exempt from the hiring freeze, so that we can do the right thing. Each and every one of these young men and women, and there are a lot of women, anybody who's, look, I've been to Iraq 17 times now, Afghanistan about 9 times, and I am amazed at the number of young women who serve in uniform our country. So this bill, I already have 23, including my colleagues here, 23 Democrats who have signed on. I would love to get some of my Republican friends on this bill. This should not be a partisan issue trying to put veterans to work. And I'm sure we got some good Democrats and good Republicans out there that agree on this, and this should be a bipartisan issue. But we can stop let's be hopeful it was unintended consequences of this hiring freeze, but we can stop this by coming together, sign on to H.R. 1001. Again, I want to thank my colleagues for their advocacy on behalf of workers. I noticed today that the president's nominee for Labor Secretary, Mr. Puzder, who had a very bad record with workers, I noticed that he pulled out his, he withdrew his nomination, nomination. He has withdrawn from consideration, and I think it's because of the hard work that Mr. Vesey and Mr. Boyle have done in speaking out on behalf of American workers and pointing out the bad decisions, the wage and garnishment issues that Mr. Puzder had, you know, I just think that their advocacy helped enormously in having him withdraw that nomination. So I want to thank my colleagues again for the great work that they do on behalf of all American workers, and appreciate their service to their country. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Lynch, and we're planning actually to talk about that, about someone who was, quite frankly, the worst labor secretary nominee in our nation's history, literally putting the fox in charge of the hen house. You can tell I'm from the city because I've botched that metaphor, but maybe Mark will be able to help me out with that. But to put someone in charge of the Labor Department who had a complete history of ripping off fast food workers, paying in some cases, in some Hardys, actually paying below minimum wage because they were falsely classifying workers. I can't think of really someone who, in many ways, epitomized the kind of greed that we see in our economy today than the former Labor Secretary nominee. And you know, that actually works to a point that I wanted to raise, and because I think it's a big part of what has been happening in our American economy today. In the World War II, post-World War II era, for roughly 3 decades, we had large gains in productivity and large gains in wage growth. This is from roughly the mid-1940s to about the late 1970s. You saw workers becoming more productive, working harder and smarter and better than ever, and you saw wages growing to almost exactly the same percentage, 97% increase in productivity, 91% increase in wage growth. But then over the last 30 years, something different, quite different has happened. The productivity growth has continued. The American worker is more productive than at any point in our nation's history and is the most productive workforce in the world. That's not boasting, that is an economic fact. And yet, since the 1970s, wages have barely gone up at all. And those are the averages. That doesn't account for the fact that when you're talking about the blue-collar economy, when you're talking about those who don't have a higher education, when you control for just that group, wages are actually lower today than they were 30, 40 years ago. Now you might wonder, well, how are CEOs doing? Have they shared in the pain? Well, 50 years ago, CEOs made 20 times what typical workers make. As of 2013, they made just under 300 times a typical worker's pay. From making 20 times more than your average worker to more than 300 times your average worker. Now, I believe in capitalism. I believe in the market. But clearly something is deeply wrong in our economy, the structure of it, when we have that sort of a situation, when workers are not being rewarded for their hard work. And you know, I wanted to bring in here my colleague, Mr. Vesey, because I recall him talking a little bit about his family experience and the similarities to my own, and the fact that blue-collar workers like our parents actually have fewer opportunities in America today than they did when we were growing up. Fewer job opportunities, for lower wages, and not as rich benefits. I say not as rich benefits, actually very insecure benefits in terms of health care and a lack of a defined pension. So I'll yield now to Mr. Vesey to possibly talk more about that and other parts of the heart and soul of our blue-collar caucus.
Thank you, Representative Boyle. And, you know, one of the things that I remember growing up in Fort Worth, Texas, was, we were blessed to have several manufacturing facilities that were union shops. We had General Dynamics, which is now Lockheed Martin, and when I was growing up, we had about 30,000 employees out there. Bell Helicopter, which is owned by Textron now, lots of employees out there. We had Miller Brewery, which is still there now. It's Miller Coors Brewery. We had several places like General Motors. I think I mentioned a little bit earlier. So we had several places that had good benefits. I had family members that worked at many of those places. Good benefits, good jobs that people could really be proud of. And one of the reasons why we've seen the decline of pay in this country is because the Republicans and their efforts to undermine labor. And when you start talking about undermining labor, and when you turn on these talk radio shows, you turn on the Rush Limbaugh show, you turn on the Mark Levins, you turn on these shows, there are other reasons why we've seen the decline of pay in this country is because the Republicans and their efforts to undermine labor. And when you start talking about towns like White Settlement, towns like Benbrook, the community that I grew up in Sop 6 and Como, and I think about the middle class jobs that many of these union shops brought to all communities. Again, whether it was the white community, the Hispanic community, black, they allowed people to be able to put some food on the table. And I got to tell you, I was really kind of tickled and shocked at the same time by a article in the opinion section in the Wall Street Journal back on September the 3rd, 2015. It was titled "The Shop Steward in the White House," and it was taking a shot at President Obama for all of the things that he was doing for American workers. And many of the things that the Wall Street guy that wrote the article was complaining about, saying all these things about President Obama, they were all actually really good things that the president was advocating for. My question, and what I want to know, and what I want Rust Belt workers and people all around the country to ask, is this presidency, is this administration going to embody and really embrace those same principles that was talked about President Obama when he was really trying to protect these workers? Is this president going to do the same thing? Are his partners in the legislative branch here in the House, our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, the senators on the other side of the Capitol that are Republicans, are they going to also stop going after American wages, stop going after American workers and their benefits, and start standing up for these workers so they can put some more food on the table? That's what that we should be asking and that we should be talking about. One of the things in that area, and President Trump, he could put out a